Have you ever wondered why some of the world's greatest discoveries were hidden, as if they were never meant to be found? From tombs sealed in silence, to cities swallowed by the sea, each one holds a mystery that still refuses to let go. Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the place where history whispers its strangest stories. If you enjoy these journeys into the forgotten and the unexplained, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's begin. The forgotten cave of 1,000 Buddhas, sealed in sand. Beneath the shifting sands of the Gobi Desert, where the wind howls endlessly across a barren horizon, there lies a secret that remained hidden for nearly a millennium. A cave filled not with treasure in the form of gold or jewels, but with something far rarer, an ocean of human devotion, painted and written upon its walls, sealed away as if time itself was asked to protect it. This is the story of the forgotten cave of 1,000 Buddhas, concealed beneath layers of desert silence and rediscovered by accident in the early years of the 20th century. It begins in the arid basin of Dunhuang, an ancient city along the Silk Road. For centuries, this remote outpost was a crossroads of cultures, where merchants, monks, and travelers carried not only goods but also ideas. Here desert caravans passed, bearing silks from China, gems from India, spices from Arabia, and manuscripts from far-off lands. It was at this fragile edge of the world that the Mogao Caves were carved, a sprawling network of sanctuaries cut into the cliffs, each one a canvas for the faith and artistry of countless hands. But among these hundreds of caves, one in particular would become the most mysterious. Cave 17, a small, unassuming chamber, sealed shut and hidden from sight, holding within it a collection so vast that it would one day change our understanding of Asia's history. For nearly 1,000 years, no one knew it was there. Its guardians long gone, its doors sealed, its purpose fading into legend. Imagine the scene 1,000 years ago. The monks of Dunhuang, fearing threats from war, from bandits, or from the shifting tides of politics, carefully stacking manuscripts, paintings, and sacred scrolls into a chamber. They worked quietly, perhaps chanting prayers under their breath, the sound echoing in the cave's stillness. Each document was a fragment of memory, sutras written on silk, treatises on astronomy, medical texts, contracts, letters, prayers. Each one placed deliberately, as if the monks understood that what they preserved was not for themselves, but for a future they could not imagine. Once the chamber was filled, it was sealed. Sand piled over it, the desert winds erasing its entrance. Time forgot it. Generations of monks came and went, praying in the caves of Dunhuang, painting walls with the serene faces of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But Cave 17 remained silent, lost. Centuries passed. Dynasties rose and fell. The Silk Road grew quiet. Dunhuang, once a thriving hub, slipped into decline. By the Ming Dynasty, the Mogao Caves were abandoned, left to the mercy of dust, bats, and silence. And yet, within the sealed chamber, the manuscripts endured, untouched, shielded by dry desert air. It was not until 1900 that the cave returned to light. A Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu, the self-appointed caretaker of the crumbling Mogao Caves, was sweeping sand when he noticed a crack, a faint outline in a plastered wall. His hands brushed against it, and behind it, he sensed a hollow space. With careful effort, he pried open the seal, and there, before him, lay stacks upon stacks of scrolls, piled higher than a man. 1,000 years of silence undone in a single moment. The sheer scale of what he found is almost unimaginable. More than 40,000 manuscripts, paintings, and textiles filled the chamber. Sutras written in Chinese, Sanskrit, Tibetan, Cantonese, and more. Documents recording everything from Buddhist chants to taxation records, from medical recipes to music scores. There were banners painted with vibrant colors, depicting Buddhas floating among clouds, guardians wielding weapons, celestial musicians frozen mid-song. Wang Yuanlu could not have understood the full weight of what he uncovered. To him, it was a gift of devotion, an inheritance of faith. He did what he could to preserve it, but soon word spread, and foreign explorers arrived at Dunhuang. Men like Sir Aurel Stein from Britain and Paul Pelliot from France descended upon the cave, purchasing manuscripts in bulk, sending them across oceans to distant museums. Much of the treasure of Cave 17 was dispersed, its collection scattered between London, Paris, Beijing, and beyond. And yet, the cave still speaks. In its silence, in the faded murals of Buddhas gazing down with timeless patience, we find fragments of human longing, each scroll a voice, each painting a prayer. The cave is not merely an archive, it is a time capsule of devotion, sealed by human hands that believed what they placed within mattered enough to survive the fall of empires. Standing in the Mogao Caves today, one feels the weight of that silence. The desert outside still roars with its winds, but within, there is calm. Imagine walking the dim corridors, torchlight flickering across painted walls, thousands of Buddhas, their faces serene, their eyes watching. The murals are alive with detail, lotus petals curling delicately, halos glowing behind golden heads, attendants and pilgrims painted with expressive strokes. Every wall tells a story, and beneath it all, the echo of the sealed cave lingers, a reminder of what was hidden and what was found. What makes this story haunting is not simply the manuscripts themselves but the mystery that surrounds their concealment. Why exactly did the monks decide to seal the cave? Were they protecting sacred texts from war? Were they storing what was outdated, no longer needed in ritual? Or did they believe they were preserving knowledge for an age beyond their own? The truth remains uncertain. Historians debate, but the cave keeps its silence. And perhaps that silence is the point. The Cave of 1,000 Buddhas was never meant to be ordinary. It was meant to be hidden, meant to outlast those who built it. It reminds us that even in the most desolate corners of the earth, human beings left behind something more enduring than stone or gold. They left behind memory. Today, the manuscripts are studied by scholars around the world. They reveal lost languages, forgotten traditions, and insights into daily life along the Silk Road. They tell us how people prayed, how they healed, how they governed, how they dreamed. The cave, once sealed in sand, now breathes again through every word and image rediscovered. But still, if you stand quietly in the desert outside Dunhuang, watching the sun sink behind the cliffs, you can imagine the cave as it once was sealed, silent, waiting. The wind whips the dunes, erasing footprints as quickly as they appear. The sand drifts endlessly, covering and uncovering as it always has. Somewhere beneath it, stories lie hidden still, waiting for the day when chance or fate brings them to light. The Cave of 1,000 Buddhas is not merely a discovery, it is a reminder that silence itself can be a guardian, and that in the stillness of forgotten places, the past waits patiently to be remembered. The clay dogu figurines with alien eyes. High in the northern stretches of the Japanese islands, long before samurai walked the land, and before emperors ruled from Kyoto, there lived a people whose world was both familiar and utterly strange. They were the Jomon, hunter-gatherers who thrived on fish pulled from rivers and seas, nuts shaken down from trees, and the meat of deer and boar roaming the forests. For thousands of years their villages rose and fell, their pottery lined the hearths of homes, and their fires flickered in the same rhythm as the wind through the reeds. But from this long, patient age of the Jomon came objects that do not look like they belong to such an ancient, quiet life. They are the dogu figurines, small, clay bodies, molded by hand, baked in fire, and left behind in graves, shrines, or buried carefully beneath earth. Thousands have been discovered, each one unique. Some resemble pregnant women, with wide hips and swelling bellies. Others look like humans wrapped in heavy garments or armor. And some, the most puzzling of all, possess enormous bulging eyes, like goggles pressed across their faces. When you first see one of these figures, the feeling is difficult to describe. The body is human, yes, but something is wrong. The eyes protrude, exaggerated and vast, dominating the face, as if sight itself was the essence of being. Their heads taper oddly. Their torsos are marked with strange lines and patterns. They look almost insect-like, as if mimicking a creature we recognize but do not fully understand. Archaeologists call them dogu, a word that means earthen figure. They are small, often just the size of a hand. Yet they carry an outsized weight of mystery. What were they for? Who shaped them with such care? Only to hide them away in the soil, never to be seen again by the people who lived with them. The oldest dogu are over 12,000 years old. The youngest still predate recorded history. For millennia they were crafted and deposited, appearing across much of Japan. They were not rare trinkets, they were part of life itself. And yet, no written words from the Jomon survive to explain why. Some scholars suggest that the dogu were used for fertility rituals. The swelling bodies may represent women in pregnancy, mothers bringing new life to the tribe. The exaggerated features could be symbols of protection or blessings. Perhaps the large eyes were not meant to look like alien beings, but were a sign of supernatural vision. The ability to see into the other world, to pierce through sickness or darkness, but the alien resemblance lingers, unshakable. The bulging goggle-like eyes have inspired generations of speculation. Were the Jomon depicting spirits not of this earth? Were these images memories of beings they thought had visited them, or beings they longed to become? When you hold a dogu in your hand, or even gaze at one behind glass in a museum, you sense the deep ritual woven into its clay. Many are deliberately broken, arms snapped off, heads removed. Some were smashed before being buried. To modern eyes, this looks like destruction, but to ancient eyes, it may have been release. Perhaps breaking the figure set the spirit free, allowing it to carry prayers into the invisible realm. Others were left intact, hidden carefully. One can imagine the quiet ceremony, a Jomon woman kneeling beside a pit, dug into the soil, lowering the figure, covering it with earth, and whispering words to it. The dogu, now buried, remained in darkness for thousands of years, only to be uncovered by archaeologists who could never know what was whispered into its ears. The strangeness of the dogu only grows when you look closely at the details. Lines carved into the clay suggest clothing, jewelry, or even armor. Some figures wear what look like helmets. Others have triangular torsos marked with geometric patterns. They are neither fully human nor fully abstract. Each seems to teeter on the edge of two worlds, the world of people and the world of gods, spirits, or something beyond. Imagine the Jomon people sitting by the fire, telling stories of unseen beings who moved through the night, who listened, who watched. Perhaps the dogu were their way of making these beings visible. Perhaps they believed that to shape a figure was to bind a spirit into clay. Today, more than 15,000 dogu have been found across Japan. They lie in museums and storerooms, studied endlessly yet never yielding their full meaning. Their variety is astonishing. Some squat and round, others tall and thin, some grotesque and distorted, others serene and peaceful. But the ones with the great alien-like eyes remain the most unsettling. They stare back at you, wide, unblinking, as though still waiting for a ritual to complete. Some say these eyes were modeled after snow goggles, made of bone or wood, used by the Jomon to prevent snow blindness during hunting. Perhaps the figures were dressed in the same equipment their makers used. But why exaggerate them so far? Why make the eyes dominate the entire head? The mystery deepens when you consider how much time passed between their making. The Jomon civilization lasted over 10,000 years, longer than almost any other culture in history. Across this immense span, their pottery styles changed, their settlements shifted, but the dogu remained. This persistence suggests deep importance, not a passing fad or decoration. To them, the figures must have meant something essential, something worth recreating generation after generation. Even the locations where dogu are found add to their mystery. Many appear in graves, buried beside the dead. Others are discovered in pits within settlements, deliberately placed and covered. They are rarely found broken by accident. Most are intentionally shattered, as if fulfilling a role in some ritual cycle. There is another theory, that the dogu acted as stand-ins for humans during dangerous rituals. If illness struck a community, perhaps they transferred the sickness into the figure, then broke it to destroy the illness. The alien eyes, in this reading, are not literal depictions but symbols of the figure's ability to see and carry away harm. Still, one cannot shake the otherworldly impression they leave. The dogu look like visitors from a place beyond memory. Some call them Japan's first gods. Others, with more imaginative leaps, call them evidence of something much stranger, encounters with beings from the stars. The truth is, we may never know. No words remain, no stories survive unbroken. The Jomon lived and died. Their language swallowed by time, their meanings turned to silence. All that remains is clay, staring at us with eyes too large, too strange, too alive. And perhaps that is the greatest power of the dogu. Not that they can be explained, but that they resist explanation. They sit in their museum cases, their stares crossing thousands of years, making us wonder. Who were they meant to be? Whom did they serve? What unseen world were they carved to represent? The answer lies somewhere in the quiet spaces between firelight and shadow, between the earth that covered them and the hands that shaped them. The dogu endure, not as relics of the past alone, but as mysteries that remind us how much of human history is still unread, still untold. They wait, as they always have, their great eyes unblinking. The tomb of the sunken skulls. Have you ever imagined a place where the dead are not buried in the ground, but instead set gently into water, where time itself preserves their final resting moment? Deep in the wetlands of Sweden, archaeologists uncovered one of the strangest burial sites in Europe, a place where skulls rested on stakes, submerged beneath layers of peat, preserved for thousands of years. To the casual eye, it looks like a quiet lakebed, forgotten by history. Yet beneath its calm surface lies a mystery so haunting, so unlike any other, that even the most experienced researchers find themselves whispering as they describe it. The tomb of the sunken skulls. The discovery came at a site called Kanalljorden, a tranquil stretch of land near the town of Motala, not far from the dark forests and icy waters of central Sweden. At first glance, it looked like any other ordinary wetland, the kind of place where reeds sway in the wind and birds circle overhead. But when archaeologists began to dig beneath the soil, what they uncovered was not ordinary at all. Instead of bones buried in orderly graves, they found fragments of human skulls deliberately arranged in the mud, carefully placed on wooden stakes. It was not a random scattering of remains, it was a design, a pattern, a ritual frozen in time. The skulls themselves told stories of violence. Some bore marks of blunt force trauma, as though they had been struck with clubs or stones. Others carried evidence of healed wounds, suggesting that these individuals had survived earlier battles before finally meeting their end. Most startling of all, One skull still contained the fragments of another person's bone inside of it, as if part of one head had been deliberately placed within another, an act so intimate and unsettling that it continues to baffle researchers. The peat that surrounded the bones had worked as nature's preservative. Where time would normally strip flesh and spirit away, the wetlands sealed these skulls in silence, holding them for more than 8,000 years. This was no ordinary grave, this was a watery shrine, a ritual site belonging to a Mesolithic people whose beliefs and customs remain beyond our reach. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of at least 11 adults and one infant, their heads removed from their bodies and set into the swamp. Wooden stakes still protruded from the soil, the very supports upon which the skulls had once been displayed above the water. Imagine it, the faces of the dead gazing out from the surface of a dark pool, their features long faded, but their presence undeniable. It was not burial, it was exhibition, a message to the living, and perhaps to whatever gods they worshipped. The setting itself plays a role in this mystery. Canal-Jordan lies near a natural lake, a body of water that Mesolithic peoples would have regarded with reverence. In many cultures, water is a threshold, a boundary between worlds. It cleanses, it divides, it hides. To sink a skull into its depths is not just to discard it, it is to place it into the hands of something beyond the human realm. The violence present on the bones has stirred endless speculation. Were these people enemies, captured and sacrificed, or were they community members, honored through rituals we can no longer understand? Some of the wounds suggest combat, yet others show care after injury. Perhaps these skulls belonged to revered warriors, their remains offered to the waters so that their spirits would continue to protect the living. Or perhaps, more unsettlingly, they were victims of ritual killing, preserved as warnings or sacrifices to unseen powers. Consider the infant, whose tiny skull rested alongside the adults. Its presence suggests that this was not only about strength or warfare. It hints at family, at kinship, at cycles of life and death woven into a spiritual framework now lost. One can imagine a community gathering at the edge of the wetland, carrying the skulls of their loved ones, or perhaps of their enemies, and lowering them carefully into the water. The reeds swayed, torches flickered, the air smelled of damp earth and fire, and in silence, they let the lake claim the dead. The tools found at the site add further depth. Archaeologists uncovered animal bones, stone artifacts, and traces of wooden constructions beneath the peat. Together, they suggest that this was not a casual dumping ground, but a place specifically designed for ritual. The very act of staking skulls into the mud required effort, precision, and intent. This was a performance, a ceremony, repeated over generations. To place the discovery in context, one must remember the Mesolithic era. 8,000 years ago, Sweden was a land of shifting forests, melting glaciers, and restless animals. Communities lived in small groups, hunting elk, fishing rivers, and gathering plants. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and deeply tied to the rhythms of nature. In such a world, death was never far away, and rituals surrounding it became powerful ways of maintaining order in the chaos. The Tomb of the Sunken Skulls is rare because it shows us something more elaborate than simple survival. It reveals belief, complex, deliberate, symbolic belief. It shows us that even then, when the world was new and wild, people carried within them the same need to remember, to honor, and to fear. When the first archaeologists brushed away the peat and saw the shape of human skulls emerging from the earth, they were stunned. Few discoveries in Europe matched it. Most prehistoric remains are scattered, burned, or buried. But here, in the quiet wetlands of Motala, skulls had been set like offerings into the mud, each one carrying silent testimony from a time when the dead and the living were less separate than they are today. The mystery only deepens when you consider that the bodies were never found. Only the heads were preserved, as though the community separated spirit from flesh, honoring one and discarding the other. Was the skull seen as the vessel of identity, of memory, of life force? In many later cultures, the head is regarded as the seat of the soul. Perhaps the Mesolithic people of Sweden saw it the same way, believing that to preserve the skull was to preserve the essence of the person. And yet the trauma marks complicate this. Some of these skulls belonged to people who had been beaten, struck, or killed. Were they honored warriors or despised enemies? The line between veneration and violence is thin, and in this watery shrine it is nearly impossible to separate one from the other. Close your eyes and picture it. Thousands of years ago, before cities, before kingdoms, a group gathers by the lake. They bring the head of one who has died. Some murmur chants, others remain silent. A wooden stake is prepared. Slowly, carefully, the skull is fitted onto it, set upright above the dark water. Then, over time, the stake softens, the water rises, and the skull slips beneath the surface. The community departs, leaving behind not just a burial, but a message. The dead are here, watching, listening, protecting, or warning. As the centuries passed, the water turned to peat, the forest grew dense, and the ritual site faded from memory, until the modern world came digging, unearthing the silent faces once again. Now the skulls rest not in water, but in museums, studied under glass and light. Their mystery intact but their silence broken. Even today, no one fully understands why they were placed there. Theories abound: ancestor worship, sacrifice, territorial display, spiritual gateway, but perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the people of Mesolithic Sweden never intended for anyone outside their community to understand. The ritual was theirs alone, intimate and sacred, performed on the edge of water, in the hush of dawn or dusk, far from prying eyes. The tomb of the sunken skulls stands as one of the strangest echoes of prehistory. It reminds us that even in the most distant past, humans wrestled with questions of life and death, memory and forgetting, violence and reverence. The skulls still look out from their watery tomb, their empty eyes staring into eternity, as though waiting for us to remember something we have long forgotten. And so the wetland holds its secret, a place of reeds and water, of silence and shadows. A place where the living once met the dead and gave them to the lake. A place where skulls still whisper through the peat, their words carried not in sound, but in the quiet persistence of mystery. That is the tomb of the sunken skulls, Sweden's haunting, enduring riddle. The Tower of Silence that holds no shadows. High on a barren hill, where the wind scrapes across the rocks and nothing seems to move, there stands a place once meant for the final resting of human remains. Yet it does not rest, and it does not end. The tower is bare, round and simple from a distance, an open circle of stone that seems more like a watchful crown placed upon the head of the desert itself. But the people who lived here long ago called it something else. A place of silence, a place where the dead were given to the sky. A tower built not for life, but for what came after. And yet, in all the years since, those who have come to look upon it, to measure it, to climb its path and walk its stone floor, speak of something else, not of the death it once held, not of the ancient Zoroastrian rites that unfolded within its walls, but of a peculiar absence, subtle yet unshakable. Within this tower, under its blazing desert sun, there are no shadows, not the long lines of stone pillars drawn against the dust at noon, not the sharp angled forms cast by birds circling above. The light enters, the heat presses, but the ground remains strangely even, and so the tower earned its name among the few who dared speak of it, the Tower of Silence that holds no shadows. To understand it, we must first understand why it was built. In the old world of Persia, when Zoroastrian priests taught of purity and the eternal struggle between light and darkness, the body was thought dangerous after death. It was touched by decay, and decay meant corruption. The earth must not be soiled by it. Fire must not be polluted. Water must remain untouched. So the people carried their dead to high towers, dokmas, where the flesh was left for the birds and the bones for the sun. The circle of life was closed by exposure, the body given to the natural elements. These towers still remain, some crumbling, some forgotten, but most lie in ruin. The one at Hawar, the one outside Yazd, the one beyond the hills of Tehran, all ordinary in their grim purpose. But this tower, the one I speak of now, is not remembered for its faith. It is remembered for its impossibility. Travelers who approach it speak of a strange sensation even before the climb begins. The heat of the desert presses down, yet when one draws near the stone steps that twist upward, a coolness lingers, as though the tower has trapped within itself the air of another place. Climbing the steps is not easy. They are worn down, rounded by centuries, and the dust shifts underfoot. But those who reach the circular summit speak of silence deeper than silence. The wind, still present, somehow seems dulled, as though swallowed by the stones themselves. And there, in the open circle where bodies were once left for vultures, lies the light. It pours down in an even flood, merciless and direct, for the desert sky knows little of clouds, yet no shadows stretch across the ground. If one stands in the circle, their figure leaves no trace. If a vulture perches upon the rim, its form does not mark the stone, and even the tower itself, when viewed from within, seems not to project its own lines. Some argue this is a trick of the eye, that the white stone reflects light in ways that confuse perception, that centuries of bleaching under the sun have smoothed the contrast, dulling the shadows to imperceptibility. But those who have studied other towers know this does not happen elsewhere. The villagers nearby avoid it. They say the tower drinks shadows the way the desert drinks rain. They say it hungers still, though it has been centuries since the priests last walked its steps. Children are warned not to go near, not because of faith, but because of fear. For to leave your shadow behind, they whisper, is to leave a part of your soul. And then there are the stories told by the rare outsiders who stayed too long. A French explorer in the 19th century, who wrote of climbing the tower at dusk, watching the sun set. He expected long, growing shadows to crawl across the desert, but none appeared. Not his, not the tower's, not even the great rock outcroppings beyond. And when he descended, he claimed his own shadow did not return for hours. Only later, in the lamplight of his tent, did it reattach itself, trembling, distorted, as though unwilling to be seen again. Another account comes from the 1960s, when an Iranian archaeologist mapped several dakmas near Yazd. He wrote of one tower, unnamed, where his photographs captured light evenly across the floor, though he remembered clearly his equipment standing in the middle. When he developed the images, his shadow was gone, yet the equipment's shadow was faint, half there, as if eroded. He never returned. What causes this? Some suggest the tower was built upon a place where the Earth's magnetism bends light in ways we do not understand. Others whisper that the priests who raised it knew something of the sun that we have forgotten, that they aligned their tower not only with the heavens, but with a truth deeper still, that the circle was built not only for exposure, but for erasure. That in this place, light consumes without remainder. But there are darker thoughts. Some say that those left within the tower did not merely give their flesh to the birds, they gave their presence to something else. That each body, stripped and bleached, left behind more than bone. That the tower itself absorbed the essence of countless souls, and now, in its silence, it eats the very shadows of the living, as if feeding on the last flickers of what a person is. When night falls, the tower changes. The desert sky fills with stars, brighter than most will ever see, for no cities lie near. Yet within the circle of the tower, the stars cannot be seen. The sky is clear above, the constellations burn in their thousands, but those who stand in the circle say the stars dim, as though viewed through water. Some claim the stones themselves glow faintly, a pale radiance like the ashes of a fire. No flame, no heat, just a reminder that light can exist without source. To spend the night within is rare. Travelers speak of nausea, of disorientation, of hearing voices that sound like their own but come from behind them. Some wake with sunburns far deeper than expected, as though the light there does not obey the rules of skin. Others return with eyes that will not adjust to shadow for weeks, unable to sleep in the dark, seeing faint light where none exists. The villagers speak of one man, decades ago, who tried to claim the tower for himself. He built a small shelter at the base, hoping to charge those curious enough to climb. For weeks he greeted the rare visitors, telling them stories, selling water. But then, one evening, his own shadow vanished. He was seen walking at sunset, the sky behind him, the earth before him, and yet the ground remained flat. They say he grew thin afterward, and his eyes hollowed, as if his own body no longer believed it belonged to him. One day, he climbed the tower alone. He was never seen again. His shelter collapsed soon after, as though no hand had touched it, and so the tower remains. A ruin to the faith that raised it, an oddity to those who study it, and a terror to those who live nearby. The desert shifts around it, the sun scorches across it, but still it waits. If you ever find yourself in that part of Iran, and you ask the elders of the nearby villages about the tower, they may fall silent, or they may look away, muttering that it is not for the living. But if you are insistent, they may tell you where to find it. And if you go, and you climb, and you stand in that circle of stone, take note of your feet. Look for the line that should be drawn upon the ground, the faithful companion of your every step. And if it is gone, if you stand in the full blaze of the desert sun and cast no shadow at all, remember this: not every silence is empty, and not every tower is abandoned, for the tower of silence holds no shadows. It holds only what it has taken. The Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible. They call it the Codex Gigas, the giant book. But you may know it by the name that stirs something colder in the bones, the Devil's Bible. It is not a rumor or a legend whispered from one to another. It is a real manuscript, heavier than most men can carry, taller than the length of a man's arm from shoulder to fingertip, bound in thick leather that smells of centuries, its pages shining with the dim luster of animal skin. The book rests now under careful watch in the National Library of Sweden, but its story begins long before, in the hushed shadows of a medieval monastery, where silence was supposed to keep men close to God. Imagine the year 1229, in the kingdom of Bohemia, a land of forests, castles, and cloisters. Inside the walls of a Benedictine monastery at Podlajici, there was a monk who faced ruin. His name has long been lost to time, erased from the records as if deliberately forgotten, yet his punishment was known. He had committed a crime so terrible against his order that the sentence was final and without mercy. He would be walled alive inside the monastery, bricked into a cell where he would wither slowly in suffocating darkness, his prayers echoing unanswered. Desperate, the monk offered a bargain. He told his brothers that, in a single night, he would create a book that contained all the knowledge of the world, the Bible, histories, calendars, medical knowledge, and more. This book, he claimed, would glorify their monastery for eternity and redeem his soul. But how could any man write such a manuscript in one night? How could any hand, no matter how steady, ink letters and illustrations across hundreds of pages before dawn? As midnight deepened and his quill scratched across stretched parchment, the monk knew he could not finish. His hand trembled, his breath faltered. In despair, he whispered not to God, but to another presence. And according to the legend that still clings to the book, it was not heaven that answered him. He made a pact with the devil himself. The book was completed before dawn, every page perfect, every word immaculate, every letter shining as though written with divine or infernal precision. It was said the monk did not write it alone, but guided by a hand unseen, a claw that steadied his strokes. And on one of the pages, massive and haunting, is the image that earned the Codex Gigas its darker name. A full-page portrait of the devil himself, green-faced and monstrous, crouched within a frame, staring outward with bulging eyes, forked tongue, and claws ready to seize. No other medieval manuscript dares to place the devil so prominently, so centrally, as if the book itself admits its creator. The Codex is a giant in every sense. It measures nearly 3 feet tall and weighs over 160 pounds. The vellum used for its 310 pages was made from the skins of more than 150 animals, likely donkeys or calves. To lift it is to feel the burden of centuries. To open it is to feel as though you are holding something that was never meant for human hands. Its contents are as strange as its creation. Inside are the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, written in Latin, but alongside them lie histories of ancient civilizations, texts on medicine, penitential rules, calendars, spells, even exorcisms. Within its pages, scripture rests beside remedies for fever and instructions on how to drive demons from the body. Sacred and profane, bound side by side, as if the book could not decide if it belonged to God or the devil. What is most haunting is the hand that wrote it. All of its hundreds of pages were penned by the same scribe. The calligraphy does not waver, the ink does not fade. Scholars who have studied it closely insist the writing is unnervingly consistent, as though written in a single breath without fatigue. For a book of this size, such perfection is almost impossible. A human hand grows tired, a quill dulls, ink darkens and lightens with time. Yet page after page, the codex is steady, unbroken, eerily precise. And then of course there is the page of darkness. At one point, the monk, or whatever guided him, left a full blank sheet, blackened and smeared as though scorched by fire. Some say this was a pause, a space left for something too terrible to be written, or perhaps erased after it was seen. Following this comes the devil's portrait, massive and raw, staring outward with an expression that feels alive even now. When you look into those painted eyes, you feel the monk's bargain still echoing through the centuries. Legends spread quickly around the book. It was said to carry curses, to bring ruin upon those who possessed it. Indeed, the monastery at Podlagius fell into poverty not long after, its fortunes never rising again. The codex was passed from one monastery to another, then seized during wars, looted as treasure, carried across battlefields and borders. In the 17th century, Swedish troops stormed Prague during the 30 Years' War, and among the treasures they carried back to Stockholm was the Devil's Bible. It has remained in Sweden ever since, resting behind glass in a temperature-controlled room, watched by cameras and curators. Yet some whisper that moving it never rid it of its curse, only carried that shadow into another land. There are stories, always stories, that the book resists those who pry too deeply. Archivists speak of faint unease when touching its pages, of sudden chills when standing near it alone. Scholars sometimes hesitate before the devil's image, unable to look long at its lurid detail. Others speak of dreams after seeing it, of clawed figures that appear in their sleep, whispering in a language older than Latin. The book is not merely superstition, though. It is a real, physical object, carefully measured and catalogued. Yet even here the mysteries remain. How long did it truly take to create? Modern experts suggest that a single monk writing day and night could have taken over 20 years to finish it. And yet the script never changes, never matures, never falters, as though time did not touch the hand that made it. If it was 20 years, how could one man write without showing the passage of age? Was it the hand of many scribes, carefully trained to mimic one style? Or does the darker story, the pact, explain it more cleanly than reason ever can? Even its very material carries questions. To prepare parchment from over 150 animal skins was no simple task. The hides had to be soaked, scraped, stretched, polished, cut. Why dedicate such enormous resources to one book? What drove men to pour lifetimes into its making? Perhaps because they believed it would outlast them all, a monument not of stone but of skin and ink. And it has. Nearly 8 centuries have passed, kingdoms have fallen, languages have shifted, empires risen and died, yet the Devil's Bible still waits, unchanged. The leather of its binding is scarred but unbroken, the ink on its pages as dark as the night it was written. The devil still crouches within, watching, waiting. What you see when you stand before the Codex Gigas depends on who you are. Some see a wonder of medieval devotion, a manuscript that preserved knowledge at a time when ignorance was rampant. Others see proof of human pride, of a monk daring to match God's creation and falling into darkness. And still others see a book that carries a whisper of something older, something beneath the skin of the world, something that still listens. Close your eyes and imagine being that monk, alone in the flickering candlelight of his cell. The walls are close, the air heavy with smoke and wax. You know that dawn will bring your death if the book is not finished. You dip your quill. You write until your hand cramps. You feel despair rising like water in your chest. And then, a voice. Not heard with ears, but with the marrow of your bones. A voice that offers you escape, that offers you a bargain. And on the page before you, the devil smiles. The Codex Giga still sits in Stockholm, silent behind glass, but the stories it carries are alive. Each visitor who gazes at the devil's portrait becomes part of its chain of witnesses, another pair of eyes the monster has met. Perhaps that is its true purpose, not to be read, but to be seen, to remind us that bargains once made are never truly broken, and that sometimes the heaviest book in the world is the one you cannot put down. The White Shaman rock painting that defies time. The desert has a way of swallowing time. You walk among its dry stone canyons and ancient riverbeds, and the silence feels older than anything you have ever known. There are no clocks here, no rhythm but the slow erosion of wind and the patient scraping of sand. And in the midst of this stillness, on a sheer limestone wall in the canyon lands of southern Texas, there lingers a vision that seems untouched by centuries. It is called the White Shaman. Painted in strokes of red, black, and white, the White Shaman mural spans more than 20 feet, and yet when you stand before it, the size is the last thing you notice. The figure at its center is tall and ghostly, its body filled with patterns of lines, bars, and faint echoes of wings. Its face is blank, unearthly, almost mask-like, with eyes that do not watch you but rather seem to look through you, beyond you, towards something you cannot see. Around it, dozens of smaller figures gather, human shapes, animal outlines, strange creatures with antlers, serpents, and what appear to be streams of blood. For thousands of years, this mural remained hidden in the bends of the Pecos River Canyon, known only to the peoples who lived there. It is thought to have been painted nearly 4,000 years ago, long before written language arrived in this land. The people who created it left no books, no scrolls, no carvings to explain its meaning. They left only the pigment on the rock. And even now, after endless summers of blistering heat and winters of rain and wind, the colors remain vivid, as though something within the wall itself refuses to let them fade. Scholars call the style Pecos River rock art. Dozens of murals like this one stretch across the cliffs of Texas, but the White Shaman stands apart. Its composition is dense, deliberate, layered with symbolism that feels closer to scripture than to art. When archaeologists first studied it, they were struck by the sheer complexity. It is not a hunting scene. It is not a simple tale of animals or survival. It is a cosmology, a map of the spirit world, or perhaps even a ritual frozen in pigment. One theory suggests that the White Shaman is a shamanic guide, leading souls through realms of life and death. The smaller figures are spirits in procession, perhaps ancestors, perhaps visions glimpsed during trance states. The swirling lines may be rivers, but not rivers of earth, rivers of blood, flowing between worlds, carrying life from one plane into another. There are serpents too, winding among the figures, and in many cultures, serpents are keepers of thresholds, the guardians of transformation. Stand there long enough, and your eyes begin to adjust to its rhythm. Patterns emerge. You notice that the bodies of the figures are not solid but filled with smaller lines, as though their very essence is visible. Some seem to float, others bend and dance. A few extend their arms in gestures of offering. In the center, the White Shaman raises its arms like a conductor of unseen forces, neither wholly human nor wholly divine. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and art historians have studied the mural for decades. Some argue it depicts a creation myth, the birth of the world from chaos, the moment when the first beings stepped from spirit into matter. Others see in it echoes of sacrifice, a reminder that life demands blood. Still others claim it encodes an ancient calendar, a story of seasons, and the eternal cycle of death and renewal. And then there are those who believe it to be a portal. Not a metaphorical one, but a literal gateway carved not in stone but in the mind. To sit before the mural, to focus on its figures, to allow the eyes to blur and the mind to loosen, is to follow the path the shaman laid down thousands of years ago. A path into trance, into visions, into the same realm its original painters might have walked. For the people of the lower Pecos, shamans were not ordinary men. They were travelers between worlds, chosen to bridge the gap between the living and the spirits. They drank sacred brews, smoked plants that carried them beyond themselves, beat drums until rhythm tore them from the earth. When they returned, they carried visions, knowledge, guidance for their people. The White Shaman mural may have been their scripture, their map, their reminder of what lay beyond the veil. What is perhaps most unsettling is the timelessness of the image. Unlike other rock art which often shows hunters with spears, animals in profile, or simple geometric shapes, the white shaman feels strangely modern, almost alien. The central figure's head could be mistaken for a mask, its elongated body for something drawn in another age entirely. There is a strangeness here that does not belong to the ancient world alone, but to every age, including our own. It feels as though it is watching us as much as we are watching it, and whatever knowledge it carries has not yet been spent. Archaeologists attempted to analyze the pigments. The red came from hematite, iron oxide ground to powder, and mixed with liquid blood, water or plant extract. No one can say. The black may be charcoal, the white gypsum or clay. But no analysis explains the precision of the lines, the endurance of the colors, or the staggering composition of the piece. Whoever painted it stood on scaffolds, worked for weeks or months, carried water and pigment into the desert, and yet did so with a purpose so strong that 4,000 years later, it still speaks. What does it say? That is the silence no scholar can break. The local descendants of those ancient peoples have their own thoughts. Among some native groups, the mural is considered sacred, not an artifact to be dissected, but a living presence, a spiritual being in its own right. To look upon it is to be reminded that the land itself has memory, that stories older than history still breathe among the canyons. Imagine the nights when the mural was painted, fires crackling at the canyon's edge, the smell of pigment and smoke, the shaman climbing the scaffold, his body painted, his breath slowed by plants and chants. Around him the people gather, silent, waiting. With each stroke of color on the limestone, the spirit world comes closer. The figures take form, not merely as images but as presences. The white shaman is not drawn, it is summoned, and once summoned, it does not fade. To this day, no one has fully translated the mural. Every interpretation feels partial, a glimpse of something far larger. Some scholars have proposed it depicts the myth of creation as told by the Huichol people of Mexico, in which shamans traverse rivers of blood to bring back the sun. Others note similarities with rituals of the peyote cactus, a sacred plant still used in spiritual ceremonies across the region. And yet, there is always more in the mural than any single explanation can contain. It resists closure. It resists being solved. If you travel to the site, the canyon is quiet. You approach on foot, the heat pressing down, the air dry. The Pecos River winds below, sluggish, carrying with it the same water that has carved these cliffs for millennia. And then you see it, the pale wall rising before you, and on it, the ancient vision. The mural does not shout, it whispers. Its presence is not loud but absolute, as if it had been waiting, not for one person, but for all who might ever stand there, looking upward. You leave with more questions than answers. Why this figure? Why this place? Why paint something so elaborate, so enduring, and leave no explanation? And perhaps that is the point. The mural is not meant to explain itself. It is meant to endure. It is meant to remind you that some knowledge is not given in words, but in symbols, visions, silences. The white shaman remains. Time has shifted around it. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have been born and died. Cities have turned to dust. But there, on the canyon wall, the ghostly figure lifts its arms, eternal, untouched. It holds no clock, no measure of days. It simply waits, and as long as it remains, the desert carries a question that cannot be answered, a question painted in silence, a vision that defies time. The stone head of Guatemala, with forgotten features. The jungle of Guatemala holds many secrets. Beneath its endless green canopy, where the air hums with insects and the roots of ancient ceiba trees twist like the veins of the earth itself, lies a world that time has almost forgotten. For centuries, people have spoken of strange remnants hidden in these forests. Ruins swallowed by vines, pyramids flattened into hills, and stones carved by hands that no one remembers. Among these whispers, one tale rises above the rest. The tale of a colossal stone head, half buried in the soil, with features that seem not entirely human. A face carved into silence, staring blankly toward the heavens, its features weathered yet unmistakably distinct, and disturbingly alien to those who have seen it. The story of this mysterious head begins not in the pages of ancient Mayan codices, nor in the chronicles of Spanish conquistadors, but much later, in the 20th century. A landowner named Dr. Oscar Rafael Padilla Lara received a photograph, an image that would ignite questions and controversies that endure to this day. The photograph showed a colossal stone face, smooth and unusual, with a long nose, high forehead, and lips pursed as though in quiet contemplation. Unlike Mayan art, with its intricate glyphs and stylized forms, this head was stark and austere, lacking the cultural fingerprint of any known civilization in Central America. Padilla's photograph was said to have been taken in the jungles of southern Guatemala, but its exact location was never properly recorded. As the story spread, many dismissed the head as a hoax or a misidentification, a trick of shadow and stone. Others, however, saw in it the possibility of something far older than the Maya, perhaps a remnant of a forgotten people, or even a trace of civilizations far beyond the Americas. The whispers grew louder when some suggested that the figure's face did not resemble indigenous features at all. Its nose was sharp, its lips thin, its eyes deep-set, almost resembling the art of distant lands, or perhaps something not of this earth. To those who wished to believe, the stone head became a monument to mystery itself, a question carved in stone. But the story is not so simple. In time, researchers and travelers went in search of the head, trying to confirm its existence. Some claimed to have found it. Others reported that the stone had been destroyed, riddled with bullets during periods of conflict in the Guatemalan countryside. The photograph, the only surviving evidence, became the anchor for decades of speculation. Was it real? If so, who made it? And why does it look so different from anything else in Mesoamerican history? To understand the mystery, one must step back and look at the land itself. Guatemala is a cradle of civilizations. Here the Maya built their cities of stone, Tikal, El Mirador, Uaxactun, monuments rising above the trees like mountains of limestone, each block hewn by human hands with astonishing precision. Beneath these cities lie layers of older cultures, stretching back thousands of years. It is not impossible, some argue, that another civilization, long forgotten, might have once carved its mark upon this land. The head could belong to them, a relic of a people whose name was lost before the first Mayan pyramid touched the sky. Archaeologists, however, remain cautious. They point to the many known stone heads in the region, most famously the Olmec, colossal heads, carved centuries before the rise of the Maya, found primarily in Mexico. The Olmec faces are broad, with full lips and helmets upon their brows, unmistakably different from the head in Padilla's photograph. The Guatemalan head, smooth and featureless in comparison, does not match any tradition. Skeptics argue it may have been no more than a modern sculpture, abandoned or forgotten, later romanticized into something ancient. Yet the dense jungle is a master of concealment. Entire cities have vanished under its growth. To this day, LiDAR scans reveal new ruins each year. Pyramids taller than cathedrals, hidden just a few meters beneath the canopy. If whole cities could disappear, could not a single monument also vanish, taking its secrets with it? The mystery deepens when one considers the human response to the photograph. For some, the head became proof of ancient astronauts, visitors from beyond who inspired human civilization. They pointed to its elongated skull, its expressionless gaze, its smoothness that seemed almost mechanical. For others, it was a reminder of how much history lies unrecorded, erased not only by time, but by conquest, war, and the silence of the forest. Guatemala is a land where memory and myth intertwine. Stories of giants, of lost tribes, of gods who walked among men. These are woven into the oral traditions of the region. To the villagers who live among the ceiba and mahogany trees, perhaps the stone head was not a mystery at all, but a quiet companion of the landscape, one that had always been there, watching, listening. Imagine approaching it for the first time. The jungle floor soft beneath your boots, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. You push aside broad palm leaves, swat at mosquitoes, and step into a clearing where shafts of sunlight pierce the canopy. There, half buried in the soil, is the head. Moss grows across its brow. Vines trail down its cheeks like tears. The stone is cracked, eroded, but its face is still clear. The nose long and strange. The lips, neither smiling nor frowning. The eyes hollow, shadowed, unreadable. It does not greet you, yet it does not ignore you either. It simply exists, as though it had always existed, and will continue to exist long after you are gone. What was its purpose? Was it a god, a guardian, a marker of some sacred site? Or was it simply art, a creation of beauty for beauty's sake? In human history, every monument carries intention. The Olmecs carved heads to honor rulers. The Maya carved stelae to record history. The Egyptians raised statues of pharaohs to declare their divinity. To carve a face in stone is to declare that the face matters, that it should endure. And yet the face in Guatemala is faceless in its own way, smooth, blank, universal. Its forgotten features invite us to project our own fears and hopes upon it. And so the debates rage on. Some say it never existed at all, that the photograph was staged, a clever trick played on a gullible world. Others cling to the belief that the head lies somewhere in the jungle still, hidden from view, waiting for rediscovery. Perhaps one day a team of explorers will stumble upon it again, their drones buzzing overhead, their LiDAR beams piercing the canopy. Perhaps the head will return to the light, and we will finally see it not as a mystery, but as a fact. Yet even then, would the questions end? Or would the mystery only grow deeper? For when one finds a forgotten feature, one is forced to ask, Forgotten by whom, and why? Did a civilization rise and fall here before the Maya, their traces swallowed by the earth, or is the head a lonely traveler, carved by hands we cannot identify, standing sentinel for reasons we cannot understand? The head of Guatemala sits at the edge of possibility, where fact blurs into legend, and legend dissolves into silence. It reminds us that the world is larger than our certainties, that beneath the roots and soil, beneath the centuries of war and weather, there are still stories waiting to be uncovered. Some may never be, and perhaps that is fitting, for a mystery without an answer is not a failure, it is an invitation to wonder, to imagine, to look at the land not just as it is, but as it once might have been. The stone head, whether real or imagined, whether ancient or modern, has already achieved immortality. It lives in the minds of those who seek it, in the whispers of explorers, in the questions of dreamers. Its forgotten features are not truly forgotten, for we remember them each time we speak its name. In that way it has already succeeded. It has become eternal. And so, somewhere in the jungles of Guatemala, in the land of ceiba trees and rivers that wind like serpents, the head waits, maybe buried, maybe broken, maybe gone, or maybe, just beyond the next clearing, standing in silence, staring into the heavens with its unreadable gaze. The stone head of Guatemala, with forgotten features that remind us of how little we truly know. The Hallstatt salt miners. Preserved in crystallized time, high in the Austrian Alps where snow lingers long after spring has come, lies a valley that hides one of the strangest time capsules of the ancient world. It is not a tomb of kings, nor a buried city swallowed by sand, but rather a place where ordinary lives were sealed in salt, preserved not for glory, but by accident. This is Hallstatt, the oldest salt mine on Earth, and the resting place of miners whose lives, and even deaths, were crystallized in time. Salt was once called white gold, more valuable than many treasures, for it preserved food, sustained armies, and gave power to those who controlled it. Long before coins and empires, people dug into mountainsides in search of it, carving narrow tunnels in darkness with fire-lit lamps. In Hallstatt, this search began thousands of years ago. The mountain here is full of salt veins so rich that even today they glisten when struck by light. And it is inside this mountain, beneath rock and ice, that miners once labored, men, women, even children, slipping deeper into the earth with tools made of bone, stone and wood. What makes Hallstatt unlike any other place is what the salt itself has done. Salt does not decay, it does not forgive, it preserves. And when miners perished within these tunnels, their bodies were swallowed by layers of salt that froze them in place. Flesh, hair, even the clothes on their backs, locked away in a glittering tomb beneath the earth. Archaeologists who first entered these chambers centuries later found not skeletons but people, almost as if they had only just closed their eyes. The mountain does not give up its secrets easily. The tunnels are treacherous and winding, carved over thousands of years by hands that belonged to generations of miners. Imagine descending into that darkness with nothing but a flickering pine torch. The walls drip with brine, the air is heavy, and in the silence, every footstep echoes like a drum. Miners carried picks carved from stag antlers, sacks made of hide, and wooden shovels. They left behind shoes, baskets, and rope ladders, many of which are still there, perfectly preserved. Each object looks as though it could still be used today, but they are relics of people who lived 3,000 years ago. It was in the mid-18th century that the first salt-preserved body came to light. Workers tunneling deeper stumbled upon what seemed at first like a statue of flesh, but it was no statue. It was a man, his skin tanned and hardened by salt, his hair still intact, his clothing woven from ancient fibers. He had been sealed in salt for centuries, perhaps millennia, unchanged. His body was carried into daylight, where astonished locals realized what they had found. Over time, several more miners were discovered, each preserved in a state that defied belief, and yet something uncanny lingers in their preservation. Unlike the frozen bodies of glaciers who bear the stillness of ice, the Hallstatt miners feel strangely present. Their hands still show calluses, their hair still holds color, their clothes seem to whisper of a last day's work. It is as if the mountain never truly let them leave. The salt made them immortal, but not in the way they would have chosen. Historians began piecing together their lives. One miner was young, barely more than a boy, carrying tools far too large for his size. Another seemed older, his bones worn from years of labor. Some still carried fragments of their last meal within them. Plants, seeds, bits of grain, all preserved by salt. It is a strange intimacy to know what someone ate thousands of years ago, and stranger still to imagine them frozen at that moment, forever miners at work. Hallstatt itself became a word of power in archaeology. The Hallstatt culture is the name given to much of early Iron Age Europe, a civilization marked by its salt trade, its craftsmanship, and its burial customs. This culture stretched far across Europe, but its heart beats inside this mountain. Salt wealth allowed the Hallstatt people to thrive, to trade with faraway lands, to shape tools and weapons that spread their influence across the continent. And at the center of it all were the miners, whose endless digging fed this ancient economy, though for some it also became their grave. The preserved miners raise questions that have no easy answers. Were their deaths accidents, tunnels collapsing, air running thin, or were they something else? Some suggest that salt, while preserving, also suffocated. The mines were dangerous, filled with shifting earth and sudden floods of brine. For a child to be found so deep within suggests desperation, or necessity. Families may have worked side by side, each generation carving further into the heart of the mountain, until one mistake sealed their fate. The deeper you go into Hallstatt's story, the more surreal it becomes. Imagine a family line, where grandfather, father, and son all worked in the same tunnel. The grandfather dies there, his body crystallized. Years later, the son passes the same spot, his torchlight flickering across the preserved face of his father, still intact, still watching. Did they believe the mountain held their ancestors within it? Did they see these salt-preserved bodies as omens, or warnings, or perhaps as guardians of the mine? When archaeologists study the miners today, they are not only uncovering individuals but entire lost worlds. The miners' clothing reveals ancient weaving techniques, their stomachs reveal diets, their tools show technologies that seemed advanced for their time. But the greatest mystery is how salt, a mineral born from oceans millions of years old, became a preserver of human life in such uncanny detail. In a sense, the Hallstatt miners are not merely bodies, they are messages written in salt, carried across time. Walking through the Hallstatt mine today, one feels the weight of that preservation. The tunnels are silent, except for the dripping of brine, the air cool, the light dim. Everywhere the walls glitter faintly, crystals reflecting torchlight. It feels less like a mine, and more like a cathedral, where the mountain itself has taken on the role of keeper and priest. Here the miners remain, unseen yet present, woven into the salt that surrounds them. Legends grew around the miners. Some locals whispered that the preserved bodies were not truly dead, that the salt had captured their souls along with their flesh, binding them to the mountain forever. Others said the miners had offended something deep within the earth, and that their preservation was a punishment, to work forever in silence, unable to leave. Science offers one answer. Salt preserves by drawing out moisture, preventing decay. But standing in the tunnels, one cannot help but feel there is more to it than chemistry. These miners are not bones or relics. They are lives, mid-breath, mid-step, mid-labor, caught forever. The Hallstatt salt mine is still active today, the oldest operating mine in the world. Modern machinery extracts the same mineral that once sealed the miners. Tourists walk through guided passages, past reconstructed ladders and baskets, past displays of the preserved artifacts. But deep inside, beyond the public routes, lie the true chambers, the places where the past still sleeps in crystalline silence. Hallstatt is not a place of kings or conquerors. It is not a city swallowed whole. It is something quieter, something more intimate. The story of ordinary people whose work and deaths became eternal. The salt carried their lives forward into our time, allowing us to see them not as distant ghosts but as neighbors, as fellow workers, as human beings who once descended into the same darkness we now explore. In the end, the Hallstatt miners remind us of something haunting. History does not only survive in stone monuments or written words. Sometimes it survives in flesh, sealed by accident, waiting in silence for someone to find it again. The salt preserved their bodies, but it also preserved their story. One carved not in books but in crystal, hidden beneath the Austrian Alps, where time itself crystallized into eternity. The sunken temples of Baiae, where emperors drowned in luxury. Beneath the waves of the Bay of Naples, where fishing boats drift lazily on the water and the sun scatters gold across the gentle ripples, lies a city that should never have been forgotten. It was once a city of marble colonnades, wide thermal baths, villas so immense that they swallowed entire hillsides, and gardens perfumed with roses carried from across the empire. Its name was Baiae, and for the Romans, it was not simply a city, it was a place of excess, of indulgence, of whispered intrigue. Some called it paradise on earth, others, with scorn, called it the sewer of Rome. Today, its ruins lie silent beneath the sea. Statues stare through veils of seagrass. Mosaics lie shattered but gleaming under sand. Walls tilt, collapsed under centuries of shifting earth. Fish glide through the shadows where senators once schemed and emperors once feasted. And yet, in the stillness of the underwater ruins, you can almost hear echoes of laughter, the pouring of wine, the splash of bathwater, the murmur of conspiracies that shaped the empire itself. Baiae was more than a resort. It was a stage on which Rome's greatest figures revealed their truest selves. Here Julius Caesar plotted against his rivals. Here Mark Antony courted Cleopatra. Here Augustus, Tiberius, and Nero retreated from the capital's eyes and indulged in desires that no senate would ever dare record. But Baiae was also a place cursed by its own earth. The land beneath it shifted, cracked, and sighed, for Baiae stood upon the restless breath of volcanoes. Over time, the ground sank, dragged down by the slow collapse of chambers beneath the surface. Villas, temples, and porticos followed, swallowed inch by the sea. What survives today is a drowned world, a museum beneath the water, where divers move through silence, passing through marble doorways, never meant to touch salt water. Let us step into that drowned city, wandering slowly through its history, its luxuries, its sins, and its secrets, until we see how Rome's most glittering retreat met its strange, quiet fate at the bottom of the bay. When Baiae first rose to prominence, it was not yet the decadent haven that would make it infamous. The volcanic landscape around the Bay of Naples had long been a place of wonder and fear. Sulfur rose from vents in the earth. Pools bubbled with gases that could intoxicate or kill. The air carried a heat, unlike anywhere else in Italy. To the Romans, these were not just natural features, they were signs of the divine. They believed gods lived here, gods who could soothe the weary, cure the ill, and perhaps whisper secrets of life itself. It was here that they built baths fed by thermal springs, pools where warm mineral water rose directly from the ground. At first, these were humble sanctuaries, quiet places for healing, but the Romans never left anything humble for long. Soon, simple pools became grand bathhouses, and those bathhouses, perched on cliffs overlooking the glittering bay, began to draw Rome's elite. By the late Republic, Baiae had transformed into something more. Wealthy senators and generals built villas that sprawled like palaces. They brought artists to paint their walls with frescoes of gods, gardens, and myths. They laid mosaic floors so intricate that walking upon them was like stepping into a painting. The architecture was daring, domes, vaults, terraces that stretched over the sea itself. Baiae, some said, was where Roman engineering became art. But engineering was only part of the story. The real allure of Baiae was what happened inside its walls, out of sight of the Roman people. Rome was a city of rules, traditions, and appearances. Even the most powerful men had to act with restraint before the eyes of the Senate. In Baiae, those restraints dissolved. It was here that men and women of the highest rank indulged in pleasures denied them elsewhere. Wine flowed in fountains. Parties lasted for days, carried on by torches into the night. Music and laughter rose across the water, and behind the closed doors of villas, whispers told of games and gatherings far beyond the imagination of ordinary Romans. Baiae was a world apart, where reputations were both made and destroyed. Cicero once remarked bitterly about the corruption of Baiae. To him it was not a city of healing, but a city of moral collapse. He claimed it had become a breeding ground of vice, a place where even Rome's greatest statesmen abandoned dignity. For others, this was precisely its appeal. Imagine walking along its colonnaded streets in those days. Marble statues stood at every corner, their white stone catching the sunlight. Vendors sold perfumes, exotic fruits, and oysters pulled fresh from the bay. Chariots brought guests from one villa to another, while slaves carried torches through gardens at night. The scent of incense hung in the air, mixed with the salt of the sea. In the distance, music drifted from a villa perched on a cliffside, its lamps glowing like stars against the dark water. Among those who walked Baiae's streets were some of history's most legendary names. Julius Caesar came here to plan and to rest. It was said he admired Baiae's strategic position, both a retreat and a stage for his ambitions. Mark Antony and Cleopatra were seen here together, their presence sparking gossip across Rome. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, came often, finding both healing in the baths and secrecy in the villas. But it was Tiberius and Nero who perhaps left the strongest shadows across Baiae's history. Tiberius, withdrawn and secretive, built villas where high walls shielded him from prying eyes. Some whispered of cruelty behind those walls. Nero, infamous for his excesses, turned Baiae into a theater for his desires. Banquets, performances, and spectacles followed him like shadows. Suetonius, the historian, recorded stories of Baiae that were half rumor, half scandal, yet they fed the city's reputation as a place where Rome's rulers drowned in luxury. And it was not only emperors. Senators, generals, and poets alike came to Baiae. The poet Propertius wrote of its allure, describing it as a place where love affairs flourished and where hearts were lost and broken. To visit Baiae was to step into a world where rules no longer applied. Yet Baiae's beauty was also its curse. Beneath the marble and mosaics, the land itself was unstable. The entire region lay within what we now know as the Phlegraean Fields, a vast volcanic caldera. The earth shifted, the ground rose and fell. Fumaroles breathed out gases that killed birds in mid-flight. To the Romans, these were signs of gods, perhaps Pluto himself, for they believed this was the entrance to the underworld. Over centuries, the ground slowly sank. Villas that once looked out across the sea found their lower floors flooded. Temples tilted, mosaics slipped beneath the tide. At first, owners rebuilt, raising floors, adding new walls, but the sea kept coming. Bit by bit, Baye was swallowed. Today, divers can still walk through those drowned streets. They pass marble statues, their faces softened by centuries of waves. They move through rooms where frescoes cling to the walls, colors still vivid despite the salt. Mosaics lie beneath shifting sand, their tiny stones forming patterns of dolphins, gods, and feasts. It is a world both ruined and preserved, crystallized in silence. Archaeologists who study Baye call it a Roman Atlantis. Yet unlike Atlantis, Baye was real, its history recorded in letters, poems, and scandals. What we see beneath the water is not myth, it is evidence of lives lived at their fullest, of power displayed without restraint, of a city that burned too brightly to last. And still there are mysteries. In some submerged villas, statues stand arranged as if frozen in the middle of a ritual. Temples dedicated to gods of the sea rest half-collapsed, their altars still visible. Coins, jewelry, and household items lie scattered across the seafloor, abandoned when the water came too fast. Some believe secret chambers remain undiscovered, holding treasures that emperors left behind in their flight from the sinking city. To swim through Baye today is to feel a strange tension. On one hand, the beauty is undeniable, columns rising from the sand like forests, fish darting through courtyards, shafts of sunlight piercing the surface to touch mosaics no one has seen for centuries. On the other hand, there is a quiet warning. Baye was a city of indulgence, but indulgence could not hold back nature. In the end, the earth claimed it, and the sea sealed its story. When you stand on the shore of the Bay of Naples and look across the calm water, it is easy to forget what lies beneath. Tourists walk along the beach, boats glide past, the waves sparkle under the sun. Yet just a few meters below, an entire city sleeps. The temples of Baye, once alive with laughter, feasts, and music, now echo only with the soft rush of currents. The emperors who once ruled here are long gone. Their feasts have ended, their laughter silenced, their power crumbled. But Baye remains, its ruins preserved by the very sea that destroyed it, a reminder that even the grandest luxuries of empire can be drowned in time. And so the story of Baye ends where it began, with the sea, with the earth, with the restless breath of a land that could not be tamed. Beneath the waves of Naples lies a city of marble and shadow, of memory and silence, a city where Rome once revealed its truest self, and where emperors, in the end, drowned not in water, but in their own luxury. The forgotten stone circles of Senegambia. Along the wide and winding rivers of West Africa, in the lands of Senegal and the Gambia, there are places where the earth rises, not in mountains, nor in walls, but in circles of stone. They sit quietly in the fields, often surrounded by tall grass, scrub trees, and the sounds of insects humming in the heat of the day. To the untrained eye, they may look simple, upright stones planted in the soil. Yet when you walk among them, when you pause to measure their alignment, to look at how each one was placed, you begin to sense something more, something deliberate, something ceremonial, something left behind by hands that worked with purpose centuries ago. The stone circles of Senegambia are among the most mysterious monuments in Africa. Scattered across more than 100 kilometers, they consist of over 1,000 circles, built of red laterite stone, a material carved from the very earth around them. Each circle holds between 10 and 25 standing stones, carefully cut and placed upright. Some stones rise barely above the knees, while others tower at nearly 2 meters. In total, more than 28,000 individual stones have been identified. What is striking is not only their scale, but their silence. No ancient writings have survived to explain their meaning. No carved inscriptions lie on their surfaces. No clear stories tell us who built them or why. What remains are the circles themselves, arranged with a mathematical precision that suggests ritual, tradition, and belief. Imagine the landscape centuries ago. The rivers were lifelines, carrying boats carved of wood from one settlement to another. Villages were small, but connected. Life revolved around fishing, farming millet, herding cattle, and maintaining bonds of kinship. And in this world, these circles rose from the soil. Perhaps they marked the resting places of ancestors. Perhaps they were centers of ceremony, gathering points for memory and for reverence. Excavations at some sites reveal burials, human remains interred within or beside the stones, sometimes with artifacts, iron tools, ornaments of copper, pottery vessels. This suggests they were tied to funerary rituals, a way of honoring the dead, preserving their spirit in a circle that bound them forever to the community. But there is also geometry in these sites. The circles are not random. Many align with others nearby, forming larger complexes of several circles connected together. Some contain double rows of stones, or vertical slabs paired with horizontal ones, to form entrances, or symbolic thresholds. This raises questions. Were these markers of clans, of lineages? Did each circle belong to a family group, a community, or a generation of the dead? And why circles? The choice of shape may not have been accidental. Across cultures, circles often symbolize unity, eternity, the cycle of life and death. To stand inside one of these stone rings in the Senegambian landscape is to feel enclosed, as though one has stepped into a space apart from the everyday world. Over the centuries these circles endured. The people who built them left no writing, but the stones stood even as kingdoms rose and fell in West Africa. The Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, the trading towns along the Senegal River. These were later chapters in history, but the circles predate them, whispering of a time when belief was carved not in script but in stone. Archaeologists estimate they were built between the 3rd century BCE and the 16th century CE, an astonishing span of time. That means generations upon generations returned to these same sites, adding stones, renewing the circle, binding themselves to a tradition they considered sacred. When Europeans first encountered these monuments in the colonial era, they dismissed them as curiosities, sometimes even attributing them to foreigners. But the circles are now recognized as entirely African, built by the ancestors of the Serer and other local peoples. For communities today, they are not relics of some lost civilization. They are reminders of continuity, of heritage. Oral traditions speak of the circles as places of the spirits, places not to be disturbed lightly. Some villagers avoid them at night, believing that the ancestors still move among the stones, watching, listening. Walk through the sites at Wassou in the Gambia, or Sine in Guyane in Senegal, and the impression deepens. There are fields where circle after circle rises, rows of uprights forming patterns across the plain. The stones glow red in the late afternoon light, the same red as the earth from which they were cut. Birds nest in the cracks, lizards bask on their surfaces. The silence is broken only by wind, by the faint sound of the river nearby. And yet the silence feels inhabited. One senses that these circles were never meant to be abandoned. Some archaeologists argue that the construction of these monuments required advanced social organization. To quarry the heavy laterite blocks, shape them, transport them, and set them upright would have taken planning, cooperation, and leadership. The very existence of thousands of circles suggests a society with shared values and complex rituals. It hints at a vision of the world that saw death not as an end, but as a passage, one that demanded memory, ceremony, and permanence in stone. There is also the question of the unknown. Why do some circles stand alone, while others cluster together? Why are some stones so much taller than others, or shaped into cylinders, rather than flat slabs? Were these choices symbolic, tied to rank, gender, or status? Or were they astronomical, aligned with the rising of certain stars, the coming of the rains, the cycles of planting and harvest? To date, no single interpretation explains every variation. The mystery lingers, inviting speculation. The UNESCO World Heritage designation in 2006 recognized these monuments as among the most remarkable and least understood megalithic traditions in the world. Compared to Stonehenge, or the Great Circles of Europe, the Senegambian circles remain less known, less visited. Yet they cover a far larger area, and their builders left behind more stones than most European sites combined. They are Africa's great stone mystery, a tradition of endurance written not in books but in the very shape of the earth. And so, the circles wait. Farmers plant their fields around them. Children play in their shadows. Elders tell stories of spirits moving between the uprights. Archaeologists continue their excavations, unearthing pottery shards, fragments of iron, bones of men and women who once belonged to these communities. But the deeper meaning, the why behind the circles, remains sealed in silence. Perhaps that silence is intentional. Perhaps the circles were never meant to reveal their secrets to strangers. Instead, they stand as thresholds between the living and the dead, the past and the present, the known and the unknowable. To walk among them is not to solve a puzzle, but to enter a conversation with time itself. A conversation where words have faded, but the stones still speak. The forgotten stone circles of Senegambia endure, not as ruins, not as relics, but as quiet witnesses. Their purpose may remain uncertain, but their presence reminds us that long before the written histories of kings and empires, there were communities who honored their ancestors, who shaped the earth into sacred forms, and who believed that memory deserved to last as long as stone. And as the sun sets over the fields, casting long shadows across the circles, one cannot help but feel that those memories still linger there, bound within the rings, bound within the silence, waiting for those who come not to conquer, not to explain, but simply to listen. The Headless Vikings of Dorset. The story begins not with swords clashing, nor with sails on the horizon, but with a quiet excavation in the English countryside. Dorset, with its rolling hills and windswept fields, has long seemed like a place where history settles into the earth and vanishes beneath the soil. It is the kind of landscape where farmers till their land without imagining the ghosts that might rest just beneath the surface. But one day, as workers dug into the chalky earth to prepare for a roadway, their tools struck upon something far older than stone, far stranger than roots. What they uncovered would become one of the most chilling archaeological discoveries in England, the mass grave of the headless Vikings. It was not a neat burial ground, not the kind of grave where the honored dead rest beneath marked stones. No, this was different. As spades cleared the soil, first one skeleton appeared, and then another, until dozens lay revealed. The bones told a story, even before the archaeologists brushed away the dust. Young men, tall for their time, robust and strong, with the long bones of warriors who had lived by the sword. But the most striking feature was what was missing. Each skeleton had been buried without its head. The skulls were gone, placed in a separate pit, neatly arranged as though someone long ago had sought to sever identity from body, to erase not only life but recognition. The archaeologists counted them carefully. 54 men, stripped of weapons, stripped of dignity, stripped of their heads. The ground had held this secret for nearly 1,000 years, the earth sealing away a moment of brutality that seemed to freeze time itself. Who were they? The evidence whispered its answer. The bones carried traces of Scandinavian origin, markers in their teeth, their diets, their build. These were Vikings, men who had sailed across the sea to raid the English coast, perhaps to plunder, perhaps to claim new land, as their kind so often did. Dorset itself was vulnerable. Its coastline, with its inlets and harbors, had been a frequent landing point for Norse raiders in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. But here, inland, far from the shore, their story ended in silence. Their deaths were not ordinary. Careful examination revealed the cut marks. The bones bore signs of violent execution, clean strokes across the neck vertebrae, blade against flesh and bone, as though a group of men had been lined up and decapitated one by one. The heads, separated from the bodies, were not discarded haphazardly. They were gathered together, piled into a separate pit, a ritual of punishment or warning. It was not war in the heat of battle that killed these men. It was justice or vengeance. One can imagine the scene. The Vikings, captured perhaps after a failed raid, stripped of their armor and weapons, forced to kneel before their captors. Perhaps it was the Anglo-Saxon soldiers, hardened by years of raids on their homes, who stood above them with axes ready. Perhaps it was villagers, enraged by endless pillaging, exacting a terrible revenge. The order given, the executioners swung, the heads fell one by one, rolling into the dirt, the air filled with the heavy silence that comes after violence. But why bury them here, in a pit, headless and anonymous? Some scholars believe it was symbolic, a way of stripping the Vikings of their power and their afterlife. In Norse belief, the body, the head, and the spirit were bound together. To sever them was not only to kill, but to deny eternity, to condemn the soul to wander. Others see it as a warning. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who raid our lands. Come again, and you too will lose more than your life. You will lose your very name. Soil, preserve them well. The chalk of Dorset is dry and hard, and as centuries passed, the grave remained untouched, sealed like a forgotten chamber of history. Only in the modern day, when machines bit into the ground, did the earth finally release its secret, and with it came questions that still stir unease. Why only men? Why so young, so strong? None of the skeletons belonged to women or children. None bore the marks of ordinary life-ending illness. These were warriors, men in their prime, chosen for slaughter. Their bones suggested they were foreigners, their diets richer in protein and fish than that of the average Anglo-Saxon. They had traveled across the sea, they had come with confidence. And here, in this chalk pit, their journey ended. The heads, when studied, revealed more clues. Some had their teeth deliberately filed into patterns, a practice not known among the English but seen among certain Viking groups. It was an intimidating gesture, a way of showing ferocity. Imagine the gleam of those sharpened teeth in firelight, a grin meant to unnerve enemies. But in Dorset, it did not save them. Instead, it became a curiosity for archaeologists centuries later, a detail that deepened the mystery. What was most haunting was the way the skeletons were arranged, bodies in one place, heads in another, as though the executioners had wished to erase individuality, to make the dead into nothing more than a warning mound. And yet, by preserving them so strangely, they ensured that these men would never be forgotten. Even now, standing at the site, one can feel the weight of it. The wind sweeps across the Dorset hills, carrying with it a silence that feels too deep, as if the ground itself remembers the cries, the final breaths, the thud of heads in the dirt. It is not a battlefield, not a graveyard of honor, but a place of erasure, a place where men were reduced to bones and shadows. Some legends in the region whisper of Viking raids gone wrong, of ships that came too close to shore, only to be trapped, of warriors who underestimated the resolve of the local people. Perhaps this was their fate, to arrive bold and defiant, and to end in a pit, stripped of everything. Others suggest it may have been a political act, a king's justice rendered not just to kill but to send a message across the land. In those times, executions were not merely punishment. They were theater, a stage upon which power was shown. And yet, as much as the grave tells us, it also keeps secrets. We do not know the names of these men. We do not know what villages they burned, or what shores they left behind. We do not know if they expected rescue, or if they faced their end with silence or defiance. All we know is what the earth gave back: bones without faces, heads without bodies, a memory of violence frozen in time. Today the remains are studied with care. Scientists piece together diets, origins, even illnesses, tracing back the lives of men who once thought themselves unstoppable. In the sterile light of laboratories, their story is written again, their bones mapped and measured. But no science can give back the moment of death. No data can recover the sound of the axe or the sight of a head falling into dust. That remains forever in silence, in the shadows of Dorset's hills. The headless Vikings of Dorset stand as a reminder of a time when the clash of cultures left scars not only on the land but on the bodies of men. They remind us that history is not always written in chronicles or carved into stone. Sometimes it lies hidden beneath our feet, waiting for the day when earth and memory finally meet again. And so, when you walk through the quiet countryside of Dorset, where sheep graze and fields stretch under the sky, remember what lies beneath. The soil remembers. The ground holds stories. And in one forgotten pit, 54 men still lie where they fell, their bodies parted from their heads, their names lost, but their presence eternal. The ancient underwater city of Pavlopetri. Beneath the shallow, shifting waters of the southern Greek coast, a city lies sleeping. Its walls, its streets, its open courtyards and once bustling squares now rest under layers of seagrass and sand. Pavlopetri, the name given to this place, is unlike any other discovery in the ancient world. For here is not a ruin left on the dry land, eroded by winds and sun, but a living map of a Bronze Age city preserved beneath the sea. When divers first stumbled upon it, they did not merely find fragments of walls or scattered stones. They found an entire plan of a town, spread neatly across the seabed, as though the waves themselves had pressed a glass pane upon history. And yet the story of Pavlopetri is not a simple one. This is not merely a tale of archaeology or geology. It is the story of a people whose voices were silenced long ago, whose houses were swallowed by the restless waters, and whose memory lingers like a whisper through the waves. To walk, or rather to drift through the streets of Pavlopetri today, is to feel both awe and unease, for here time has been sealed away, not destroyed, but submerged. The sea has preserved what the earth might have erased, and in doing so, it has created a puzzle that still eludes explanation. Let us drift now, slowly, into this forgotten city. Imagine yourself sinking gently into the clear waters off Laconia, the southern tip of Greece's Peloponnese Peninsula. The sunlight pierces the surface in fractured shafts, shimmering like liquid gold upon the seabed. And there, beneath you, spread across some 30,000 square meters, lies a city map almost too precise to be real. Streets run in straight lines, courtyards open into wider spaces, and foundations trace the outlines of once standing houses. Some of these houses contain several rooms, even internal divisions suggesting kitchens, storage areas, and private quarters. This was no temporary camp, no village of crude huts. This was a planned city, organized and permanent. The question arises almost immediately: who built Pavlopetri, and why here? Archaeologists date the site to around 5,000 years ago, during the early Bronze Age, though it continued to be used into the Mycenaean period, around 1600 to 1100 BCE. This was a time when the Mediterranean world was alive with trade and myth. Crete had its great palaces rising, Egypt its dynasties, Mesopotamia its empires. Pavlopetri seems to belong to this great interconnected network, a coastal settlement watching over the sea lanes that brought goods, ideas, and power across the known world. Pottery fragments found at the site reveal contact with distant places, each shard a quiet testimony to exchange between cultures. But still, why here, and why now beneath the waves? The coastline of Greece is restless. Over thousands of years, the land has shifted, subsided, and trembled under the weight of earthquakes. Pavlopetri was once firmly upon the land, its streets open to the sun, its citizens walking between homes, shrines, and workshops. But sometime after its prime, the earth shifted, the ground sank. Slowly, the waters advanced. The sea does not rush like fire or storm. It creeps, inevitable and patient. Within centuries, Pavlopetri was drowned. And yet, in that drowning, it was preserved. Unlike a city ruined by conquest or abandoned to ruin, Pavlopetri was sealed in the sea. Divers exploring the site describe the eerie sensation of swimming through its streets. Imagine swimming along a narrow lane, the sand dusting upwards like smoke as you pass. To your left and right, low stone walls rise, the outlines of houses still clear. The seaweed waves gently, curling around corners, covering thresholds where once doors might have stood. Occasionally, amphorae ancient jars lie tilted in the sand, their mouths open, their bodies filled with sediment, but still unmistakably human objects, tools of a life long gone. To swim here is to trespass in a ghost city, a place at once silent and yet vibrating with the memory of countless lives. Who were those people? The builders of Pavlopetri remain anonymous, for there are no inscriptions, no grand monuments proclaiming names of kings or gods. Unlike the ruins of Mycenae or Knossos, this is not a place of rulers remembered in myth, but of ordinary people. Families lived here, fishermen set out from here, craftsmen shaped goods to trade, women carried water along these streets, children played in the open courtyards. The hum of everyday life must have filled the air, footsteps, voices, the crackle of fire, the smell of salted fish and drying herbs. It was, in short, a human city, not a palace, not a fortress, but a place where people lived and died, and that is what makes Pavlopetri so haunting. Because in its silence we are left to imagine the most ordinary of things. No epic myths tell us who they were, but the stones beneath the sea whisper a quieter story, that they were simply people, like us, bound to their homes, their work, their rituals. When we imagine them, we bridge thousands of years not through legend, but through the shared fabric of daily existence. Archaeologists who map the city have identified at least 15 buildings, some large, some small, with clear roads weaving between them. There are even signs of what may have been public spaces, perhaps marketplaces, where goods were exchanged. The alignment of the city suggests planning, streets running north to south, structures arranged with a sense of order rather than chance. Some walls are double-lined, perhaps to reinforce them against time or disaster. This was a community with foresight, with intention, not merely a cluster of shelters. Yet even as we admire their skill, the mystery deepens. For Pavlopetri is older than most other planned towns we know in Europe. Its origins reach back to around 3000 BCE, making it contemporaneous with the great cities of the ancient Near East. Could it be that the people of Greece were developing urban planning earlier than once thought? Pavlopetri forces us to reconsider what we believed about the roots of European civilization. Perhaps this little drowned city holds within it a clue to the broader story of how humans shifted from scattered villages to organized towns, from survival to society. Let us pause now and imagine standing on the shore before the city sank. The sea lies calm, stretching blue and endless. The houses are built of stone, their walls white in the sunlight. Paths of packed earth run between them. Outside one doorway, a woman sits weaving, her hands steady as she threads colored strands. Children dart past, laughing, chasing one another along the lane. From another house, the sound of hammering rings, a craftsman shaping bronze into tools or ornaments. Further along, a fisherman patches his net, the salty breeze carrying the smell of drying seaweed. Life hums here, simple and strong. They do not know that the earth beneath them is slowly shifting. They do not know that one day their homes will lie beneath the water. For them Pavlopetri is eternal, and yet the sea remembers differently. The waters rose. Perhaps an earthquake struck, shaking foundations, pulling the land down. The people left, perhaps suddenly, perhaps gradually. Maybe they rebuilt elsewhere, or maybe they scattered, absorbed into other communities. But their city was left behind, and as the waters closed in, the walls sank, the courtyards filled, the houses drowned, and in that drowning, Pavlopetri was sealed away until divers stumbled upon it, thousands of years later. There is something profoundly unsettling about Pavlopetri's preservation. For most ancient ruins, erosion, looting, or time itself has carried away much, but here, the sea protected as much as it erased. That is why, when researchers mapped it with sonar, the city appeared in extraordinary detail. It was as though an ancient plan had been drawn upon the seabed itself. Streets, walls, courtyards, even possible tombs, all lying silently, patiently for 5 millennia. And so, the city of Pavlopetri exists between worlds. It is both past and present, both destroyed and preserved, both known and unknown. It lies at the intersection of memory and forgetting, where history drifts like a shadow beneath the waves. To gaze upon it is to see not only what once was, but to feel what might have been. A living city, silenced yet intact, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, and that the sea will always have the last word. Pavlopetri is not as famous as Pompeii or Atlantis, but in its quiet, it may be more haunting than either. For here there is no volcanic ash or mythic destruction. There is only silence, only water, only the soft preservation of everyday life, frozen beneath the tide. It asks us to remember not the rulers, but the people, not the myths, but the lives. Not the grand stories, but the quiet, ordinary moments that make a city breathe. And perhaps that is why Pavlo Petri matters so deeply. It is a mirror, reflecting not the glory of empire, but the fragility of community. To drift through its streets is to drift through the memory of humanity itself, not as conquerors or kings, but simply as people, building, living, hoping, and leaving behind traces in stone. So tonight, as we let the waves close over Pavlo Petri once more, remember the city beneath the sea. Remember its walls and streets, its homes and courtyards. Remember the laughter of its children, the work of its craftsmen, the hum of its marketplace. Remember that it was here, once, alive, and though it lies drowned, it has not been forgotten. For even in silence, Pavlo Petri speaks. The Tarim Basin mummies with European faces. In the far reaches of western China lies a desert that has swallowed civilizations whole. The Tarim Basin, framed by mountains and sand seas, is a place where heat scorches the air by day, and by night, icy winds whistle through dunes that never sleep. It is one of the harshest environments on Earth, vast, barren, and unyielding. Yet beneath its shifting sands, an astonishing secret has endured for thousands of years. A secret that seems to question not just where cultures come from, but how deeply connected human history truly is. It was here, in the late 20th century, that archaeologists uncovered bodies unlike any they expected to find in China. Perfectly preserved by the arid desert climate, their hair still shone golden and auburn. Their faces bore long noses and high cheekbones, and their clothing seemed woven with threads of civilizations far away. These were the Tarim Basin mummies, men, women, and children who appeared to carry European features, yet lay buried deep in the heart of Asia. The discovery was startling. Their faces were not the painted visions of a myth, nor the distorted interpretations of legend, but real human forms, so intact that it seemed they might stir awake under the desert sky. Who were these people, and how did they come to rest in one of the most isolated corners of the ancient world? The desert preserved them with uncanny precision. Unlike the Egyptian mummies wrapped in ritual bindings, these figures needed no artifice to endure time. The dryness of the basin simply drew the moisture from their bodies, leaving behind leathery skin, intact braids of hair, and clothing of wool, felt, and leather. Some wore tall conical hats decorated with feathers. Others rested in garments dyed in red and blue, patterned with geometric shapes that echoed designs seen as far as Bronze Age Europe. Their boots looked sturdy, built for journeys, suggesting lives of movement, trade, and resilience. Among the most famous is the so-called Beauty of Lulan, discovered in 1980. She lies serene, her face narrow and elegant, with fine reddish-brown hair still visible after 4,000 years. She was only around 40 when she died, yet her features are hauntingly vivid, as though she could have walked a city street in another time and another place. Her burial goods, woven baskets, wooden combs, fragments of wool, hint at a community skilled in crafts, a people who carried beauty into the heart of a desert. Another striking figure is the Sherchen Man, buried centuries later, his tall frame draped in a red woolen outfit trimmed with twill. His family was buried alongside him, a woman with flowing auburn hair, a child in a felt hat, and an infant wrapped lovingly in a brown blanket, a carved blue stone placed over its eyes as if to guide it into eternity. This was not a burial of strangers cast into the sand, it was the resting place of kin, carefully arranged, echoing rituals that spoke of love, continuity, and memory. But it was their faces that provoked the greatest wonder. To those who unearthed them, the sight was startling. In the center of China's deserts, in graves that predated the Silk Road by millennia, lay people who looked as if they had come from far beyond the Asian steppes. Their features seemed closer to Indo-European populations, tall, angular, with fair or auburn hair, than to the populations typically associated with the region. At first, their presence appeared inexplicable. How could such people have reached this distant, enclosed desert? The Tarim Basin is ringed by formidable natural barriers, the Tian Shan Mountains to the north, the Kunlun to the south, and endless sands in between. For centuries, it seemed a sealed world. And yet here they were, undeniable, embodied proof that the ancient world was far more interconnected than once believed. Their graves told stories of cultural blending. The textiles, for example, were extraordinary, woven with advanced techniques similar to those found in Europe during the Bronze Age. Patterns of plaid and twill echoed the weaving traditions of distant lands. The wool itself was of remarkable quality, dyed with pigments that suggested knowledge of chemistry and artistry. This was not the clothing of isolated wanderers, but of a community carrying traditions of craftsmanship across impossible distances. The Tarim Basin mummies lived at the meeting point of deserts and rivers. Though the land is harsh, scattered oases dot the landscape, where rivers flowing from mountain glaciers carved paths through the sands. In these green interruptions, people built lives, farming millet and barley, herding sheep and goats, and weaving wool into warm garments. The graves were often located near these settlements. where life clung stubbornly to the edge of desolation. For decades, the mystery deepened. Some scholars suggested these people were Indo-Europeans, perhaps part of the same migration that spread across Eurasia thousands of years ago. Others speculated about connections to the Toharians, an ancient people known from later writings whose language bore links to Indo-European tongues. The possibility suggested that the Tarim Basin was not a remote dead end, but an artery through which the lifeblood of cultural exchange once flowed. In time, science lent clarity. DNA testing on the remains revealed complex ancestries. The earliest mummies, dating back as far as 2000 BCE, carried genetic markers linked to populations from Western Eurasia, far from China's borders. Later generations showed signs of mixing, evidence that as the centuries passed, communities of different origins met, intermarried, and forged new identities. The Silk Road, when it eventually blossomed, was not the start of connection, but merely a continuation of a much older story. The faces of the Tarim Basin mummies seemed to collapse distances. They showed that human beings, even in prehistory, were never as isolated as once thought. Trade, migration, and curiosity carried people across deserts, mountains, and frontiers. Goods traveled, like wool, stones, and dyes, but so did ideas, languages, and lineages. The desert graves became a mirror reflecting the shared nature of human history. And yet, questions linger. Why did they choose these burial rites? Why were infants buried with tokens, stones, and feathers, as if guided into another life? Why do some mummies wear elaborate hats while others lie in simple wrappings? What myths did they tell? What gods did they honor? And how did they understand their place in a world so vast and unforgiving? The Tarim Basin preserved their silence but not their secrets entirely. Even now, researchers uncover new strands of connection. Their clothing reveals knowledge of sheep herding and weaving. Their bones suggest diets rich in dairy, linking them to pastoral cultures of the steppe. Their grave goods, mirrors, wooden tools, even musical instruments, hint at lives filled not only with survival, but with art, music, and ritual. The mummies stand as reminders that history is not neat. The lines we draw between East and West, between one people and another, blur beneath the sands. Long before maps divided the world, human beings crossed paths, exchanged gifts, and carried their children into lands far beyond the horizon. The Tarim Basin, harsh and unforgiving, became one of those meeting places, a crossroads written not in stone monuments, but in the preserved bodies of families who lived, worked, and dreamed under desert skies. Today they lie in museums, carefully studied, displayed behind glass, their faces gazed upon by thousands. But one cannot help but imagine them not as relics, but as people. A mother braiding her daughter's auburn hair by a desert fire. A father tending his sheep at dawn, his red cloak wrapped tight against the wind. A child laughing, eyes bright, before being stilled forever by time. They were not mysteries to themselves, but whole communities whose memory only lingers because the desert held them so tightly. The Tarim Basin mummies remind us of a truth both simple and profound, that the story of humanity is not one of isolated branches, but of interwoven roots. The desert, in its silence, preserved this truth more clearly than any library could. And as we gaze into their faces, faces both familiar and foreign, we are reminded that the past is not a distant land, but a mirror, one that shows us how deeply connected we have always been. The Nineveh Library Tablets of Lost Knowledge. There are places in the world where silence feels older than stone, places where history is not simply buried, but waiting. One of those places lies in what is today northern Iraq, in the ruins of a city once called Nineveh. Nineveh was the jewel of the Assyrian Empire, a city whose walls stretched for miles, whose palaces glittered with carved reliefs of kings, lions, and gods. But beneath the surface, in chambers lined with clay shelves, lay something stranger than stone walls or towering statues. A collection of words pressed into clay, words that carried knowledge forward from a world that should have been forgotten. This was the library of Ashurbanipal, often called the first great library of the ancient world. A library not written on paper, nor carved into stone, but pressed with styluses into soft clay tablets that hardened in fire, either by intention or by catastrophe. And it was within this library that mysteries linger, tablets that whisper of kings and demons, of medicine and omens, of floods and forgotten gods. Tablets whose survival has made them less like books and more like echoes carried forward across 3,000 years. Tonight, let us walk slowly into that world, into the labyrinth of Nineveh's ruins, into the halls where a king sought to preserve all the knowledge of the earth, and perhaps all the secrets of the divine. Imagine the year is 668 BC. The Assyrian Empire rules the Near East with an iron hand. The empire stretches from Egypt to the Persian Gulf. Its capital, Nineveh, rises near the banks of the Tigris River. Here, King Ashurbanipal reigns, not only as a conqueror, but as a scholar. Ashurbanipal was unlike most kings of his age. He was trained not only to hunt lions and lead armies, but also to read and write the cuneiform script that had already been ancient by his time. While many monarchs prided themselves on swords and tribute, Ashurbanipal prided himself on words, and not just any words but every word that could be collected, copied, and preserved. He sent emissaries across his empire, demanding tablets from distant temples and cities. He ordered scribes to copy ancient myths, medical recipes, spells, rituals, astronomical calculations, and royal chronicles. Nothing was too sacred, and nothing was too strange. He wanted it all. His library, he declared, would be the gathering place of the world's knowledge. And so, in rooms deep within the palaces of Nineveh, tens of thousands of clay tablets began to gather. When archaeologists stumbled upon them in the 19th century, the tablets seemed almost like rubble, shards of broken clay scattered in heaps. At first glance, they looked like nothing more than debris, as though an earthquake had shattered pottery and left fragments to be trampled into the dirt. But slowly, painstakingly, scholars realized what they were seeing. This was not pottery, these were words, tens of thousands of fragments, pressed with wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, the oldest writing system humanity had devised. Pieced together, the tablets began to speak. They spoke in Akkadian and Sumerian, in languages long extinct. They told of gods who quarreled, of floods that nearly wiped out humanity, of demons who stalked the night. They told of remedies made from plants, of astronomical tables that charted the heavens, of prayers meant to bind the favor of distant deities. They told of history too, kings and battles, victories, losses, treaties, betrayals, and somewhere within them perhaps is a trace of what the ancients feared most, the memory of what had been lost before. One of the most haunting texts to emerge from the Nineveh library was a story of a great flood, a story of a man warned by a god to build a boat, to fill it with animals, to survive a deluge that would wipe away all life. Sound familiar? The story of Utnapishtim, preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh, predates the biblical story of Noah's Ark by centuries. Yet here it was, on clay, in a city reduced to ruins. Was the flood a memory of an actual event, carried forward in myth across cultures? Or was it a tale too powerful, too universal, not to be told again and again? The tablets do not answer. They only preserve the story, leaving us to wonder why different civilizations carried the same haunting memory of waters that drowned the world. But the library did not only collect stories, it collected spells. Some tablets describe rituals meant to banish demons. The Assyrians believed the world was teeming with spirits, many of them malevolent. Lamashtu, for example, was a demon goddess said to prey upon infants and pregnant women. Incantations against her survive in the tablets, prescribing amulets, charms, and whispered words to keep her away. Other tablets describe exorcisms, instructions for purifying a house, or invoking protective gods. These were not read aloud like stories, but spoken with reverence, as though the very sound of the words held power. Imagine standing in a temple in Nineveh, torchlight flickering, while a priest reads from one of these clay tablets, the air heavy with incense, the walls echoing with words in a language now long gone. Those words are still here, in the tablets, silent, until we learn to read them again. There were medical texts too, remedies for fevers, rashes, wounds, recipes that combined herbs with prayers, as though healing came from both nature and the gods. Some remedies sound startlingly modern, instructions for washing wounds, for applying poultices. Others veer into the mystical, prescribing incantations or symbolic acts. Astronomy, too, filled the shelves. The Assyrians tracked the stars and planets, not only to understand the heavens, but to divine the fates of kings and empires. Eclipses, comets, the movements of Jupiter or Venus. These were not random events, but messages. The tablets describe how certain alignments foretold war, famine, or the rise and fall of rulers. To read the tablets today is to glimpse a world where science and superstition were not separate, but intertwined, where healing required both herbs and hymns, and where the stars were both physical lights and omens of destiny. And then there are the darker tablets. Some tell of omens so dire they seem almost like curses, predictions of the death of a king, the collapse of a city, the destruction of empires. Reading them now, knowing Nineveh itself would be destroyed only decades later, the words feel chilling. Did the scribes sense it? Did they feel their empire trembling even as they pressed these warnings into clay? In 612 BC, Nineveh fell. A coalition of Babylonians, Medes and others, stormed the city. Fires raged, palaces collapsed, walls crumbled. The empire of Ashurbanipal ended in ruin. But in that destruction, something strange happened. The clay tablets, thousands of them, were baked harder by the fires. Instead of turning to ash, they survived. Knowledge survived because of catastrophe. Centuries passed. The city was buried in dust. Names were forgotten, languages died, but the tablets endured. When they were finally uncovered, many were shipped to museums in Europe, particularly the British Museum, where scholars labored to piece them together like puzzles. Even today, thousands remain untranslated, fragments of a vast library still locked away in ancient script, and so the Nineveh Library remains unfinished. We do not yet know all it has to tell. Perhaps we never will. But what it has already whispered reshapes our understanding of the ancient world. It reminds us that empires fall, but words, if pressed into clay, if preserved by fire, can outlast the walls of kings. Imagine now standing in the ruins of Nineveh, the Tigris flowing nearby, the stones silent, the air heavy. Beneath your feet, once, were shelves of clay. Knowledge stored not for us, but somehow reaching us across 3,000 years. A library of ghosts, a library of echoes, a library of lost knowledge, never fully found. The Nineveh Library is not just a relic, it is a reminder. A reminder that we are not the first to hunger for knowledge, nor the first to fear its loss. That even in the ashes of empires, words may still endure, and that sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not what we have lost, but what still waits, unread, in fragments of clay. The forgotten tomb of the Red Queen. Under the heavy canopy of the Mexican jungle, where the roots of ceiba trees split the earth and parrots dart in flashes of color, there lies a tomb that whispers of both mystery and grandeur. It is a place known to archaeologists as the resting chamber of a woman they named the Red Queen. Her body was not found in the great central temples of Palenque, where kings proclaimed their power, but in a quieter chamber, beneath layers of stone, shrouded in cinnabar dust so thick that it stained everything crimson. Unlike the well-documented rulers, whose names survive in glyphs carved into limestone, her identity has remained silent. Was she a queen? A consort? A mother of kings? Or perhaps a priestess whose power rivaled the throne itself? That unanswered question has ensured her tomb remains one of the most evocative and mysterious discoveries in Mesoamerican archaeology. The story begins in 1994, when Mexican archaeologists excavating the Temple 13 in Palenque uncovered a sealed chamber. Palenque itself was already one of the jewels of the Maya world, a city that flourished during the Classic period, between the 6th and 9th centuries CE, known for its artistry, its architecture, and its deep connection between the rulers and the divine. Palenque had been studied for centuries, but many of its secrets lay hidden in plain sight. Temple 13 stood just beside the more famous Temple of the Inscriptions, where King Pakal the Great had been buried in his massive stone sarcophagus. While the tomb of Pakal had been discovered in the 1950s and revealed unparalleled insight into Maya funerary rituals, Temple 13 had long remained sealed and unremarkable until archaeologists broke through the stone and found something astonishing. Inside was a vaulted chamber, its walls coated with dust that shimmered red even in dim light. A stone sarcophagus dominated the center, its lid carved with images faint but purposeful. When the archaeologists pried it open, they found the skeletal remains of a woman, her bones and funeral wrappings soaked in mercury-colored cinnabar powder, a substance mined at great cost and reserved for rituals of immense significance. It was as though she had been painted in eternal blood, a symbolic gesture tying her death to rebirth, sacrifice, and divine power. Around her body lay offerings, jade beads, shells, pearls, and obsidian blades, indicating that she was no ordinary woman. Whoever she had been, her death demanded reverence, her body consecrated in a way few others in Palenque had been. It was this overwhelming presence of cinnabar that earned her the name La Reina Roja, the Red Queen. Cinnabar, derived from mercury sulfide, was a mineral of deep red hue, often associated with life force, blood, and the divine. Across Mesoamerica, its use in burial practices signified the highest form of ritual respect. It was toxic, too, meaning that her tomb became sealed with both beauty and danger. The archaeologists who entered it had to take precautions against exposure, for the very substance that once symbolized eternal life could just as easily kill the living. The identity of the Red Queen has been debated since her discovery. Some scholars suggest she may have been Lady Tzakbu Aja, the principal wife of Pakal the Great. Married to him in the early 7th century, she played a crucial role in consolidating dynastic power by binding Pakal's lineage to another royal family. If this were true, her burial near Pakal's own tomb would make sense, symbolizing their eternal partnership. Others argue she could have been Pakal's mother, Lady Sak Kuk, who served as regent before Pakal took the throne and is remembered in inscriptions as a formidable political figure. Still others speculate that the Red Queen's identity may be lost to history entirely, her memory erased by the collapse of Maya power in Palenque's later years. What is clear, however, is that her burial was meant to elevate her presence beyond mortality. Her face had once been covered with a jade mask, pieces of which were still found among the cinnabar. Jade, the stone of eternity, represented the breath of life itself in Maya cosmology. To place it upon her body was to transform her into an ancestor spirit, one who would guide the living and remain forever close to the gods. Pearls, shells, and precious stones reinforce this divine image, surrounding her in a wealth that was not simply material but spiritual. The very location of her tomb also raises questions. Why was she placed in Temple 13 rather than within Pakal's temple itself? Was this a deliberate decision, a way of distinguishing her identity while still binding her to the royal lineage? The proximity of her burial to Pakal's suggests a relationship of deep importance, yet the separation hints at mystery. Perhaps her role was extraordinary, but not one entirely within the bounds of kingship. Beyond the speculation of her identity, the discovery of the Red Queen's tomb provides a rare window into the Maya approach to death and immortality. For the Maya, death was not an end, but a transformation. Rulers were buried not simply as individuals, but as embodiments of cosmic cycles. Their tombs were built as symbolic entrances to the underworld, portals where the soul would pass into the realm of gods and ancestors. The cinnabar dust covering the Red Queen would have linked her body to the regenerative powers of blood and rebirth, allowing her spirit to join the endless cycle of life. Palenque itself is a city of whispers, its ruins stretching across the Chiapas jungle. Once alive with thousands of people, it now lies in fragments of stone, its temples overtaken by vines, its palaces echoing with silence. The discovery of the Red Queen reminded the world that beneath those stones still lie voices waiting to be heard. Unlike written inscriptions which tell of kings and victories, her tomb spoke of something more personal, the reverence of a single individual, a woman whose life shaped the fate of the city. Yet her story remains incomplete. DNA testing has proven inconclusive. While skeletal analysis revealed she was around 60 years old at death, details of her life, her origins, her exact relation to Pakal are lost in the gaps of history. Her name, which once might have been recorded in glyphs on a stela or in murals, is absent. In this way she is both remembered and forgotten, her image vivid, yet her identity erased, and perhaps that is why her tomb resonates so deeply. She embodies the mystery of the past itself, a reminder that for every great king we know by name, countless others, women, priests, warriors, children, played roles equally vital, yet unrecorded. The Red Queen emerges from the shadows of time to remind us of these forgotten lives, their influence still felt in the silent stones of Palenque. Walking through Palenque today, one can still feel the weight of her presence. The Temple of the Inscriptions stands high, with Pakal's tomb deep within, but beside it, Temple 13 waits in quieter dignity. Visitors cannot step into her chamber, but they can stand before its sealed entrance, imagining the day it was first opened, when archaeologists saw the glint of cinnabar under their lights and realized they had uncovered a secret buried for over 1,000 years. The Red Queen remains one of the most haunting discoveries in Mesoamerican archaeology. She was laid to rest with reverence, her body covered in eternal crimson, her treasures whispering of her importance, and yet she resists definition. Was she queen, mother, consort, priestess, or all of these at once? That silence, that refusal to yield her identity fully, makes her tomb not only a relic of the Maya, but a reminder of the limits of history itself. And so, deep beneath the jungle canopy, in the cool chamber of stone she lies. The cinnabar still clings to her bones, her jade still gleams faintly in the red dust. Her tomb is not merely a grave, but a statement, a silent proclamation that she mattered, that she was remembered, that her death was worthy of grandeur. Yet her name, her voice, her story in its fullness remains hidden, waiting perhaps forever to be rediscovered. The Red Queen of Palenque rests where the jungle grows thick, a figure caught between memory and oblivion, her tomb a bridge between the living and the forgotten. She is both presence and absence, a queen without a name, preserved in the eternal embrace of crimson dust, and as long as her tomb endures, she will never be entirely lost, her mystery echoing through the halls of stone, through the ceaseless song of the jungle, and through the imagination of all who seek to understand the fragile brilliance of the Maya world. Some mysteries stay buried, not because we cannot solve them, but because they remind us how much of the past still belongs to silence. From lost tombs to sunken temples, these fragments of history wait in the shadows, daring us to keep searching. This has been Unearthed Secrets, where the forgotten is never truly gone. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love the unexplained. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now.